Hello everyone and welcome to this new interview that we are recording on the sidelines of the Atlantic Dialogues. I'm Akram Zawi, and today I am very pleased to have two distinguished panelists with me. Foreign Minister Ana Palacio, former Foreign Minister of Spain. Welcome, Ana. Thank you for joining us. And Minister Erika Mouynes, who is the former Foreign Minister of Panama and the current chair of the board of the Latin American Center of the Atlantic Council. Thank you very much for joining us as well. We are very happy to have you both, a former Foreign Minister of a country of the so-called Global North, OECD country, let's call it this way, and of a country of the so-called Global South in Latin America, Central America, more precisely. I wanted to ask you about the current developments in global governance. This has become a very trendy topic, so to speak, in recent years, with the aggravation of the climate crisis, with the pressure on global trade, the return of industrial policies, with increased flows of migration that have become very important in the political agendas of a lot of countries. So we have a lot of common challenges to tackle all together. I will start by turning to you, Minister Palacio. My question is regarding the very recent developments that we have seen following the COP29 in Azerbaijan, which was deemed as a bit disappointing by a lot of countries in terms of commitment by developed countries to finance the climate transition, but also the G20 in Brazil, the Summit of the Future as well. So what's your take on these very rich years that we've had in the two past years, and this year in particular?
Well, I think that, first of all, it's a great pleasure. It's an honor. And it's an honor, I think that this is it has become one of the must meets of the year, these Atlantic dialogues. And it has proven to be just a future-bound initiative. When it started 12 or 13 years ago, it was kind of an odd issue, the Atlantic. And today we see to what extent this initiative of the Atlantic Basin, this recovering the label Atlantic for all the Atlantic, overcoming this idea that Atlantic relations were relations in the old days, in the old world, between Europe and the United States. So my great pleasure. And also it's a great pleasure to be here with my former colleague in the works of representing our countries, Erika Mouynes, if I have pronounced it well. So you asked me, and you have mentioned three meetings that have taken place recently: the COP29, G20, and the Summit of the Future in United Nations. This is the first. It was September, then more or less at the same time, a few weeks ago, COP and the G20. What are the lessons? What can we? Is that? Well, the world is mutating. I mean, we have to acknowledge that there is the world of yesterday, and then there is another world that is being born. And let's take what has happened and what are the lessons from the COP29, from the G20, and from the Summit of the Future. COP29. Well, I know that people feel disappointed, but whenever you speak about money, even in our private lives, when you speak about money, there is a possibility of being disappointed because it's the tough issue. I think that what the COP showed is that we need to reorganize that. The state island walked away. The rest I don't like South. I think South means nothing. But there were many interlocutors, many participants that felt that this was not it. And in my opinion, this means that we have to look into the matter. We are coming from an idea of development that has been based on aid, and on aid from the north to the south. Let's be clear, the challenge we have today on energy cannot be solved with public money. Notwithstanding, agencies, international financial institutions, the amounts that we need to make this transformation of the world, but let's focus to make a transformation in Africa. Africa has still today 700 plus millions that have no access to electricity. This needs the involvement of private capital, and there is liquidity. What we need, therefore, is to create the conditions for this private capital to jump in. Does this mean that there is no role for public money? No, absolutely not. But I don't want to be negative, but if you go to this 300 billion, the North has pledged 100 billions in 2009 and at the COP in Copenhagen. How you implement this is extremely fuzzy, and the same with this. Is this going to be grant? Is this going to be credit? I think that we have to understand that we need to have the big leverage of private money getting involved, which means de-risking the investments. In order to de-risk the investments, you have two areas to work into: governance, and this is a responsibility for Africans, for the receiver, and there is a big responsibility by rich countries, and we could debate if in rich you include China or not, but these things. But in general terms, rich countries and international financial institutions to create mechanisms, to broaden the mechanisms. The World Bank has MIGA. MIGA is, of all the constellation of the World Bank, the dwarf. It should be the giant. We have to make a powerful MIGA. MIGA is the institution of the World Bank Group that addresses this risk insurance in certain conditions, which allows private capital to invest in greenfield, so risky projects all over the world. I will leave it there. Let's then address the G20 or others.
Yes, of course. I mean, the G20 is definitely on the agenda, knowing that it was organized in a Latin American country this year. Next year, the COP is also going to be organized in Brazil. But I'm very interested in what your take would be, because Panama obviously is a very major segment of global trade, first of all, which also requires global governance mechanism, notably through the WTO, which has been paralyzed in recent years. Minister Palacio also addressed the issue of the private sector, and you're a corporate lawyer by training. And third, as Minister of Foreign Affairs, you played a very important role in issues such as gender, notably in corporate governance, women empowerment, but also climate. So what is your take on what has just been said by Minister Palacio?
So I think I'm more cynical than Minister Palacio in terms of the reach of the COP. I've been at COPs, at very recent COPs, where this was a statement signed for methane, the emission of methane. And I saw two precedents that I asked, why are you signing that? Do you even know how to get there? Because those countries are very big into beef production, and you need to essentially curb your cows in order to reduce and these two gentlemen said to me, no, we'll see it later. And I was so frustrated. I'm like, you're signing something in front, of the public and a commitment on reduction of emissions that you have no idea how you're going to get there. And I think it was a little bit of a picture of a lot of the things that happened there where because the enforcement is lacking of saying, yes, I'm going to do, and how long it was between it was the first commitment of money and how much it has been deployed. So I am more cynical, but hopeful that this will change. And I think the walkout of some island nations, I don't know if it's the mechanism or not, but I do think that there needs to be a shakeout of the situation. And there is a large uncertainty that we need to address, and that is a new administration of the U.S. that may not sign up to it. And we need to recognize and understand that and not sort of try to tackle it as if not happening. And what are we doing to address it? I very much subscribe to what Minister Palacio said about the need for private investment because there is I don't know if there is not the funds, but nobody is going to, on its own, sign up to the amount that is required. And if the conditions are not there, which are not at the moment and not even close to being there, and she mentioned one that's critical, which is unless you have the backing, the guarantee, there's not going to be a flow of that private investment, which is not going to take because the risk is too high. So you need to mitigate that risk, and that's one of the mechanisms. And there are several. And aiming at that, it would be critical and very important to unlocking everything all the funds that are required going forward. So I'm distrustful, but I am very hopeful that this could turn. In terms of the other and sort of global trade and where it's going, I mentioned in our panel that there is a trend that we need to recognize. First, a little bit of the WTO in chaos in terms of the enforcement and a stalemate of what is happening there, and some countries not enforcing among themselves the rules. And the second one, the trend of economic nationalism, where countries are looking inwards. It is more popular. I don't see that trend changing in the near term because you see a lot of countries adopting, some more successful than others. Morocco is an example where its industrial policy seems to be working and actually providing results, tangible results that are good for the economy. The problem that we have is that when you have funds for that kind of policy, that's wonderful. The smaller countries that don't have the fiscal room to invest inwards are a bit stuck. And you can see the IRA plan of the US that was $50 billion, the post-pandemic recovery fund of the EU, another large check, the money that China has invested on itself. So all these, when you have the pocketbook to provide the funds, it's ideal. When you're smaller countries and you don't have, and if there's one problem among African nations, it's that. And we can say the same for most Latin American countries. So there is no fiscal room to try to look inwards. So we rely extensively on trade becoming better, bigger, and stronger, and to the export and import of products. So I see that as a worrisome trend for some, not for others, and I don't see it changing anytime soon.
May I just make a couple of comments? It's not, I'm an optimist, an informed optimist, frankly. But I have a few comments. First, on methane. Well, now we have taken on the cows, but the real big chunk of methane is fossil. It's fossil fuels. And I think that there we have to push. And, okay, I enjoy a good steak. I understand that at a certain moment. But let's go first things first. And methane by oil companies is something that should be tackled today. And this is where we should be united. Instead of dividing methane of cows, no. The big thing is methane. Second, optimism. Yeah, Trump may say I may take the United States again out of the Paris Agreement. But you know what? It has always already happened. And we saw how states and cities and big corporations and individuals stayed in the course. So, yes, Trump, we have to be wary of all the things. And frankly, I'm extremely concerned. I'm not a Trump fan, to say the least. But again, let's see the things where the things are and where the real issues are. My third comment is on enforcement. The Paris Agreement is not international public law. Because I think that in all this reflection, we have to understand that international public law is also evolving. It's also evolving. In the creation, in the way the Paris Agreement was reached has nothing to do with the production, the classical production of international public law that was gentlemen around the table deciding on something, and that is fiat. Here we had the world of today that is extremely messy, but this is what it is, and we had corporations and subnational actors and even individuals that were there. But it's true, enforcement today is blaming and shaming. And yes, we are not there. Absolutely. I fully agree with you. We have to be much stronger. But the truth of the matter is that Paris meant that all over the world there was an awareness of what was happening, of how we had we had meteorological consequences from the acidification of the seas to big floods as we just had in Valencia, and how this concerned all of us. So again, we have to go on, but let's see where we are working, and again be realistic. So these are my comments. Of course, I fully agree with what Erika Mouynes said, but on Africa, yeah, the problem really is indebtedness of these countries. Because we say fiscal, and maybe, well, this is for a very selective audience. But the truth is that that many of these countries that should be our priority are what we call bankrupt. That's the reality where we are. And this is a collective endeavor. Where I would like to highlight how China circumvents this, because we, the financial institutions, etc., we have difficulties because we have our conditionality. China has a barter approach, no criticism, just assessment, a barter approach that I make this dam, you give me this mine, and this is it. And I extract the mine, I take the mine, I take the produce, etc. I am very confident on the voice. I will personalize in Africa and Latin America, because I think that this launching, this reflection, balanced, this will come from the Atlantic Basin.
Very interesting. So it's a good segue to the next question I was going to ask. Obviously, a big chunk of the Atlantic Basin is Latin America, precisely. And we've also seen some problems of indebtedness, obviously, in Latin America, Argentina being a case in point. So it's the first country that it owes It's the first debt of the IMF bilateral debt of the IMF towards another country, but it's also probably going to be a major country for the global transition because of Amazonia, but also because of the mining resources, notably in lithium, in copper, and other critical minerals. You recently penned an article for the Financial Times saying how there should be some sort of an adjournamento of the policy towards Latin America. I would very much like to hear your thoughts about how Latin America is preparing for the next Trump presidency and is perhaps collectively trying to prepare for what's to come, notably for the different topics that we've talked about that relate to global governance.
As you pointed out, I'm a big believer on the positives of Latin America that I don't think highlight enough. And when we don't highlight enough vis-a-vis not just the North, but this more concretely in the U.S., there is the negative perception that Latin America is all about migration, irregular migration, that they're taken over, that it's all bad, and that all Latin America wants is more foreign aid. And I think that's very much distant from the truth by sheer numbers, and that there's an opportunity missed out because Latin America offers anything and everything that we're all looking for. We were talking about climate change, the biggest resource that we have, the natural resources there, to critical minerals. So when you're talking about chips, manufacturing, all that, you come back to some of the things we have. How are we preparing? I think there is no need to see a Trump presidency as a threat. You can see it as an opportunity. You just need to be transactional, if you may, in the same way that they may conduct the administration. There are many things that are valuable to Latin America, and this is where we have to create more agency among ourselves and not wait for others to dictate how is it going to play out, but rather organize ourselves. I've looked and done a lot of research on how to manage political risk, and I think there are ways for us to attract investment in spite of any sort of perceived political risk that they may be between, going from the left to the right. So if we are able to move past that vis-a-vis, one, the investors, because we need to attract more foreign investment, that's a must, precisely because what you were talking about and the levels of indebtedness where they are, and that there's little room for us to deploy in the infrastructure that is necessary among Latin America. So if you don't have the resources, you need to attract that, and how you're going to attract that, one, and then second, how you're going to play out a different type of administration. And, for foreign policy, ideally, you have something that is predictable. That is the ideal foreign policy standard. Mm-hmm. You always know how they're going to do and what they're going to play out and what does that mean. This is no longer the case with many countries, including the US, and that's okay, but then you need to be flexible and you need to be able to maneuver around it, and that comes from organization, not waiting and not in a holding pattern where you're reactive, but rather you're adapting and you're preparing for what's to come.
Minister Mouynes, Minister Palacio, thank you very much for these very insightful remarks. And thank you all for having followed this interview.